February 14, 2012, 11:30 p.m. EST, Beverly Hills Hotel, 3 days after Whitney Houston's death. Clive Davis sits alone in his penthouse suite, staring at a contract that was never signed, Whitney's comeback deal that could have saved her life. For 29 years, he controlled every aspect of her career, molded her into the biggest-selling female artist in history, and lost her completely when she finally chose authenticity over obedience. Tonight, surrounded by Grammy parties celebrating music's elite, the most powerful man in the industry faces the devastating truth. He created a masterpiece, then destroyed the woman who made it possible. The war between Whitney Houston and Clive Davis wasn't about music. It was about the right to exist as a human being rather than a product. The relationship began with a lie. On that fateful night in 1983, at Sweetwater's nightclub, when 19-year-old Whitney Houston stepped onto the small stage to sing for Arista Records' legendary president, both participants understood they were engaged in a performance that had nothing to do with authentic expression. Whitney, desperate to escape her mother's suffocating control, offered herself as raw material to be shaped. Clive, rebuilding his reputation after being fired from Columbia Records, needed a vehicle for his vision of perfect crossover success. What neither anticipated was that their creative partnership would become the music industry's most successful and toxic relationship. From the moment Clive signed Whitney to Arista Records, he began reconstructing her identity with the precision of a master architect. The gospel-trained church girl from East Orange became a carefully crafted product designed for maximum market penetration. Every song choice, every image decision, every interview answer was filtered through Clive's vision of what America wanted from a black female superstar. The genius of Clive's strategy was its subtlety. Whitney didn't realize she was being programmed because the programming felt like collaboration. When he selected Greatest Love of All as her signature ballad, it seemed like recognition of her inspirational power. When he insisted on wholesome imagery, it felt like protection from industry exploitation. When he controlled her social circle, it appeared to be career guidance. But beneath the Grammy wins and platinum sales, Whitney was slowly disappearing. The first 5 years of their partnership from 1985 to 1990 represented the most successful artist-executive relationship in popular music history. Whitney's debut album becomes the best-selling debut by a female artist. Her second album, Whitney, makes history by debuting at #1. 7 consecutive #1 singles establish her as the voice of a generation. Clive Davis appears to have created the perfect pop star, technically flawless, commercially unstoppable, culturally significant. What the public doesn't see is the psychological cost of this perfection. Whitney, naturally spontaneous and emotionally direct, learns to second-guess every instinct. The woman who could improvise stunning vocal runs in church now rehearses every ad-lib until it sounds natural. Spontaneity becomes choreography. Authenticity becomes performance art. Clive's control extends far beyond musical decisions. He influences Whitney's romantic relationships, suggesting that certain men might be more appropriate for her image. He monitors her social activities, ensuring she associates only with people who enhance her brand. He even shapes her political opinions, crafting positions that appeal to the broadest possible audience without alienating any significant demographic. The system works flawlessly until Whitney falls in love with Bobby Brown. Bobby represents everything Clive fears: unpredictability, controversy, authenticity without commercial calculation. When Whitney announces her intention to marry Bobby in 1992, Clive recognizes an existential threat to the empire he spent a decade constructing. This isn't just about a relationship, it's about Whitney choosing personal happiness over brand management. The intervention attempts become increasingly desperate. Clive orchestrates private meetings with Whitney's family, enlisting Sissy Houston in efforts to prevent the marriage. He commissions market research showing that association with Bobby Brown could damage Whitney's crossover appeal. He even arranges strategic coincidental encounters with more suitable potential partners, hoping to redirect Whitney's romantic attention. But Whitney Houston, for the first time in her adult life, chooses herself over strategy. The wedding on July 18, 1992, marks the beginning of open warfare between Whitney and Clive. What had been subtle manipulation becomes overt control attempts. Clive begins speaking about Whitney in interviews as if she's temporarily insane, requiring patience until she comes to her senses. He publicly distances himself from her personal decisions while claiming credit for her professional achievements. The power dynamic shifts dramatically during this period. Whitney, emboldened by marriage to someone who loves her chaos rather than demanding her perfection, begins questioning decisions she had previously accepted without thought. Why does Clive choose her songs? Why must her image remain so carefully managed? Why can't she express opinions that reflect her actual beliefs rather than market-tested positions? The questions become demands. The demands become ultimatums. The 1998 album, My Love Is Your Love, represents Whitney's first successful rebellion against Clive's total control. Working with producers he didn't select, exploring sounds he wouldn't have approved, collaborating with artists he considered inappropriate for her image, Whitney creates music that reflects her actual personality rather than her manufactured persona. The album's success proves that authentic Whitney can be commercially viable, a discovery that terrifies Clive because it suggests his control isn't creatively necessary. But Whitney's victory comes with devastating consequences. Clive, recognizing that his traditional manipulation techniques no longer work, escalates to psychological warfare. Industry whispers begin suggesting that Whitney's erratic behavior makes her unreliable. Radio programmers receive subtle suggestions that her new material might not be safe for widespread play. Concert promoters hear concerns about her ability to deliver consistent performances. The campaign is so subtle that Whitney doesn't recognize it as coordinated sabotage, but its effects are unmistakable. Opportunities that should naturally follow her continued success mysteriously evaporate. The industry that once celebrated her achievements now treats her as a liability. The isolation pushes Whitney toward increasingly self-destructive behavior as she tries to understand why her world is crumbling despite her artistic growth. Clive's strategy backfires catastrophically. Instead of driving Whitney back to compliance, the pressure accelerates her psychological collapse. The woman who once represented perfect control becomes a symbol of celebrity excess. The voice that once soared through impossible ranges now struggles with songs that should be effortless. The person Clive created to serve his vision is destroying herself trying to escape it. The 2002 Oprah interview represents the complete breakdown of their relationship. Whitney's erratic performance on television humiliates both participants in their two-decade partnership. Clive watches his greatest creation self-destruct on live television, realizing that his attempts to maintain control have created the very chaos he sought to prevent. The final phase of their relationship, from 2003 to 2012, becomes a sad dance between a man trying to save his legacy and a woman trying to reclaim her soul. Clive continues offering Whitney opportunities for redemption, but every project comes with conditions that require her to return to the manufactured persona she spent years trying to escape. Whitney continues accepting these offers because she needs Clive's platform, but she can no longer perform the emotional labor required to maintain his vision of her identity. The 2009 comeback album, I Look to You, illustrates the impossible bind their relationship has created. Whitney needs Clive's industry connections and promotional power to reach audiences. Clive needs Whitney's voice and star power to maintain his reputation as a hitmaker, but neither can trust the other enough to create anything approaching their former magic. The album succeeds commercially while failing artistically, satisfying no one completely. The tragedy of Whitney and Clive's relationship isn't that it ended badly, it's that it was always destined to end badly. Clive's vision required Whitney to remain frozen at age 19, the eager church girl desperate for approval. Whitney's growth as a human being required her to evolve beyond anyone else's vision of who she should be. These needs were fundamentally incompatible, but both participants needed each other too much to acknowledge the contradiction until it was too late to resolve it peacefully. The phone call Clive receives on February 11, 2012, informing him of Whitney's death, represents the final defeat in their 29-year war. Whitney has achieved the ultimate escape from his control, leaving him with a catalog of recordings that will generate profits forever, and a legacy that will always be incomplete. He won every battle while losing the war entirely. In the years following Whitney's death, Clive Davis has become the keeper of her official legend, the man who explains her significance to new generations of listeners. His memoir positions himself as the genius who discovered and developed her talent while portraying her struggles as tragic personal failings rather than consequences of their toxic dynamic. He has achieved posthumous victory in their control war, getting to tell Whitney's story without her voice complicating the narrative. But the recordings tell a different story. When you listen chronologically to Whitney Houston's discography, you can hear the progression from manufactured perfection toward authentic expression. The early albums showcase technical mastery in service of Clive's vision. The later recordings reveal a woman fighting to express her true self, despite industry pressure to remain a product rather than a person. The real tragedy isn't that Whitney Houston died young. It's that she spent most of her adult life trying to become the person she actually was, fighting against the person Clive Davis needed her to be. Their 29-year relationship represents the music industry's most successful artist development story, and its most destructive example of what happens when commercial success becomes more important than human dignity. Today, when young artists sign record deals promising creative control and artistic freedom, they're benefiting from Whitney Houston's sacrifice. Her battle with Clive Davis changed how the industry thinks about artist autonomy, proving that even the most successful partnerships can become prisons if they don't allow room for human growth and authentic expression. Clive Davis created Whitney Houston, the product. Whitney Houston died trying to become Whitney Houston, the person. The war between them wasn't really about music. It was about whether artists have the right to evolve beyond their creators' visions, no matter how successful those visions might be. February 14, 2012, 3 days after Whitney's death, Clive Davis sits alone with that unsigned contract, finally understanding that his greatest success was also his most devastating failure. He built an empire on Whitney Houston's voice, while slowly destroying the woman who possessed it. The war is over. Nobody won.